What we're going to do today is we're going to explore a little bit about the intersection of what I would consider like traditional project management and agile project management. So before we get started, I'd like to know, we're kind of spread out here, I'd like to kind of know a little bit of who I have in the room. So would you guys, who would self-identify themselves as a project manager? Okay, excellent. Okay, so of those that self-identified as a project manager, who's doing something with Agile now? Okay, cool. Last question. Of you guys that consider yourselves a project manager and are not doing Agile, who gets angry when they hear Agile people talk? Anybody? Ever? I did. I mean, it's kind of like that because I feel that a lot of times, you know, there's really no place for project management in Agile. If you talk about Scrum, Scrum doesn't talk about the role of a project manager. A lot of times we talk about this idea that really there is no management whatsoever. And so when I got involved in Agile, probably, gosh, 6 years ago now, something like that, I started down this path of trying to figure out how we could actually deliver a project on time, on scope, on budget, using this methodology that I was being introduced to. And a lot of the folks that I was talking to were telling me things like, you know, this is Agile, Mike. You just kind of get what you get when you get it. You know, it just happens, and we just build software every couple of weeks. And, you know, when the customer's ready to take it, we take it. And I don't know about you guys, but the environments that I was working in at the time weren't really conducive to that kind of message. And so what I did is I went down this path of trying to understand Agile well enough to where I could wrap my head around how I could be an effective Agile project manager. Okay? So a little bit about my career. My name's Mike Cottmeyer, by the way. I work for Pillar Technology. That's my contact information. I'll share it at the end. But a little bit about my career. So I actually studied software in college and then quickly did like data center stuff for like the next 10 years. I was never really into the software engineering space. And then about 10 years in, got into project management. And I got into project management because I was kind of passionate about getting things done. And I was really kind of a little bit more ad hoc when I very first started. And then as I worked for this lady that really encouraged me to go out and get my PMP, so I kind of studied the formal side of project management. And like I mentioned, about 6 years ago, really got kind of immersed into the Agile project management space. And I did this talk last year about 15 times. We did it all over the place. And it was really kind of cool. And it was neat to get out and talk to different audiences at PMI Global Congress and at the Agile conferences to try to help project managers understand how they can make the switch to Agile. This talk also has the benefit, if you happen to be an Agilist, who would consider themselves like an active Agilist? That's probably an interesting question that I didn't ask. Who of the active Agilists believes that there is no role for project manager in Agile? Anybody think that way? Okay, interesting, cool. So what this talk is really designed to do is it's designed to use the language of project management to talk about Agile. Okay? And the reason why I think that this is important is because most of the time in large organizations, we have things like PMOs. And we have project managers. And we are expected to manage a budget. And we're expected to manage cost. And I personally don't believe that those kinds of things are incongruent with doing Agile. Okay? So my goal here really is to help you guys have some language when you leave about how we can talk the language of project management but still deliver projects in an Agile way. Okay? So this talk is one of those things where sometimes it feels like it takes me 45 minutes, sometimes it takes an hour. I can ramble on this stuff for days. You guys can absolutely raise your hand, ask me a question. If I say something that you guys have a reaction to, by all means, go ahead and just jump in. So at the end of the day, regardless of whether we're doing Agile project management or whether we're doing traditional project management is about dealing with time, cost, and scope. Okay? We want to know when the project's going to be done. We want to know how much is it going to cost. And we need to have some idea of what we're going to get for our money. It's also about getting risk dealt with as fast as we possibly can so that we can have some assurance along the way that we're going to be able to deliver within some tolerance on those time, cost, and scope constraints. Okay? So as I started exploring this and talking with folks about project management and Agile and things like that, you start to learn that people approach things from a fundamentally different point of view sometimes. And what I started noticing as I'd go out and I'd do these talks at like local PMI groups and things like that, is that project managers, for the most part, at least project management as it's taught, kind of by PMI out of PMBOK and things like that, is that our fundamental assumption that we approach the idea of planning with is that what we want to do is we want to manage uncertainty out of our projects. We feel like that if we have enough upfront analysis or what have you, that we can identify everything that there is to know, and then that we can conform the plan. And I think what we're learning in the software space is that there's a lot of problem domains that managing uncertainty out of the project isn't really a good thing. There's a lot of times where somebody's going to come to us with an idea, something that they want to build, a product they want to take to market. They might understand how much revenue that they want to get. They might have some general idea of what it is that they want to build. But at the end of the day, forcing them to go through a discovery process to figure all that stuff out is somewhat counterproductive. Okay? So what I'm suggesting, and I'd kind of like you guys to go along for the ride here with me a little bit, is that in some projects, some of the time, our goal is not to get uncertainty out of the project. But if you say, Mike, well, if I don't have the uncertainty out of the project, how can I manage to plan? Okay, and I think that's where Agile comes in. And I think that's where it can help us out. So what we're doing fundamentally, when we start thinking about Agile methodologies from a project management perspective, is we're putting in a framework that allows us to effectively deal with uncertainty. Okay? And because sometimes the things that we're building are complex enough that we have to be able to inspect and adapt. We have to be able to let those outcomes emerge. Does anybody disagree with that? Man, you guys are an easy audience today. And sometimes I get in these talks in local PMI chapters, and one time I had this guy tell me that if you can't figure out what you want to build from the time that you just conceive it, right, that you're either irresponsible or incompetent. Okay? And I'm like, really? That's some pretty strong language, right? Okay? So, one of the examples that I use quite a bit is I carry around an iPhone. Okay? I love my iPhone. I didn't buy the first generation iPhone. Anybody buy the first generation iPhone? You guys did? What are some of the things that the first generation iPhone didn't do? Anybody? It didn't do Compass, but it didn't integrate with corporate email. It couldn't do things like multiple calendars, things like that. What are some of the things it still doesn't do? It doesn't do multitasking. Okay. Gosh, I don't know. There's probably lots of things it doesn't do if I really thought about it. And so there's certain problem domains where it really helps us to do a little bit, get it out into market, get some feedback from it, maybe even make a little bit of money off of it, okay, and then to take that feedback from our customers and fold it in, okay? So when you guys are talking to your PMOs out there, you don't have to approach it from the standpoint that Agile is the way all the time. It's appropriate for every problem domain. I personally think it's more appropriate for more problem domains than it's not. But what we can do is we can start having a conversation about the nature of our projects. And if we go to our leaders and we say, look, what is the cost of change management here? Process doesn't come for free. So if I'm filling out forms and I'm, writing big documents and I'm trying to really heavily manage change, there's costs associated with that. And when change is the norm, when discovery is what we want out of our projects, we've got to fundamentally shift the paradigm of how we think about project management. Okay? We want to be able to create a framework that allows us to manage within these constraints that we put on ourselves, but allows for kind of emergent outcomes. Okay? Any questions? Yes?
You might get to this, but
Okay.
so if somebody hires our group to do a project,
Yep.
if they don't know exactly what it is they want, they have a pretty good idea.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go about giving them some kind of a cost? For
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
project is?
We're,
I mean, you can't have too much.
if you don't know what it is, right?
Right.
Yeah. So really the question you're asking, so let's explore this. What I'm going to do in the next couple of slide sequences is we're going to talk about how Agile projects deal with time, cost, and scope. And what the short answer to your question is that we start off with a high-level understanding and we guide that solution into an acceptable outcome. Okay? So let's try this a little bit. Kind of another set of assumptions that traditional project managers make, and I think it kind of comes with this idea of we want all this certainty up front, is we start with the idea of scope, okay, on our projects. Most projects that I've worked on, and again, not every project, I've actually had some people get mad at me and say that what I'm really talking about is just bad project management, and you could probably make a case for that. Okay? But most projects that I've done, somebody comes to me and says, hey Mike, this is what we want to build. I say, okay, cool. So this is what you want to build, kind of like what you were just talking about a little bit. And then what do? We go out and we work with our engineering teams. We get estimates. Okay, we figure out who's available to do the work. We sequence the work. We create our Gantt charts. We come up with all our dependency maps. We put resources onto the project. And what generally happens after we do that? It's wrong. Or you go to the business and you tell them what it is and they go, well, gosh, I kind of wanted it to cost about half as much, and I kind of wanted it to take about half the amount of time, right? So we get pressure to reduce the time and cost to build it. Okay, so if we're responsible, now we go through this kind of negotiation process where we work the scope down into something that we can build within the time and cost constraints. And so kind of another key concept I want you guys to think about, and this is, again, language that you can use with your PMO. If scope is not fundamentally our primary constraint, and that's what our management's really telling us in that case, right? The scope was kind of a wish list. We were hoping we could get it done within the time and cost that we had. But at the end of the day, time and cost were really our primary constraints, okay? So if indeed time and costs are our primary constraints, then what we need some credible strategy for being able to figure out how to vary scope in a responsible way, okay? And so what I talk about a lot with this kind of stuff is you can kind of make it in kind of real terms. We have a market date that we want to hit with a product. If we have to get tax software out, we got to have it out, well ahead of April 15th, okay? A lot of times our organizations are constrained by team size. There's only so many dollars available to hire people, and that's kind of predetermined. So if time and cost is our primary constraint, then we have to have a way of being able to vary scope. It's just triple constraints, right? It's the iron triangle of project management. You can't fix all three. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about what happens when somebody tells you you have to fix all three, right? Because that happens quite often. Okay? So how do Agile projects manage time? Well, again, because we have this idea that time and costs are the primary constraints, what we generally do is we fix the duration of our project. So we say, okay, we need to have this project released in a year, and then we'll do something like break that project duration down into manageable chunks, releases, maybe 3 to 4 months long. And then we break our releases down into iterations that are typically between 1 and 4 weeks. Okay? So sometimes people joke, I've actually heard people say this, that Agile projects always finish on time. They do always finish on time. You just don't necessarily know exactly what's going to be in it, right? Okay? And so what happens is that, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit.